Welcome to Gatsby Chapter 3, the chapter where we finally see the big party. We finally meet Gatsby. There's a lot of exciting things and a lot of information here in this chapter that's more than just a party. Also, my dogs are on another level today, so if you hear them, just ignore them. So, we're going to start off with Nick describing this party. Remember, he is Gatsby's neighbor, and Nick is not one to just kind of pop into a party. So, he's been seeing these parties go on. A lot of people come to them. People are not invited to Gatsby's parties. They just kind of show up. And this is not a once a month Saturday supper club kind of thing. This is a Friday through Sunday. Anybody in the world can come to this party free of charge. They have no idea who Gatsby is. They just show up. Free alcohol, free food, all funded by Gatsby. And we have to wonder why. Why throw these huge parties for anybody to come to? Anybody at all. Drink as much as they want, eat as much as they want. Hundreds of people end up coming to his parties every weekend from Friday to Sunday. So, that being said, Nick does not go to his parties on his own. So, Gatsby sends him an invitation. Or rather, Gatsby sends a butler to give him an invitation. And Nick discovers he is one of the few people who has actually been invited. He says people were not invited, they went there. And he even goes further to tell us that once there, they were introduced by somebody who knew Gatsby. They never met Gatsby. And after that, they conducted themselves according to the rules of behavior associated with amusement parks. When he says this, Nick is being extremely judgy of the way people act when they go there. He describes all the people, the new money people, the old money people, his boss, anybody that goes to this party acts as if there are no consequences for their actions. They act not like adults any longer. They act like kids at an amusement park hopped up on too much candy. So this is Nick's judgment that we are seeing from his inner thoughts. He even says sometimes they came and went without having met Gatsby at all. Came for the party with a simplicity of heart that was its own ticket of admission. So these people would enjoy what Gatsby was giving them without even knowing who he was, and they even kind of talked a little crap about him while they were there. So just know, again, even though Nick tells us he's not a judgmental person, inwardly he's pretty judgy of people. So he goes to Gatsby's party after being invited, and he doesn't really know many people there, and as soon as he arrives, he decides he's going to try and find Gatsby. And no one seems to know where Gatsby is or have even met Gatsby, so he's a little out of place, a little out of sorts. He doesn't know anybody. He's kind of awkward by himself, so he decides he's going to get drunk until Jordan Baker comes and just shows up and wants to hang out with him. Now, Jordan Baker is old money. She's hanging out with the old money people. So they kind of go to their table, have, some conversation, judge people a little bit. They also talk about who Gatsby is, and they kind of share stories about what they know about him. Like maybe he killed a man, or maybe he's a spy. So there's a lot of different stories about who Gatsby is. It seems no one actually knows who he is. One girl even claims that her dress got ruined at his party and he sent her a new one that cost $265. Now, inflation, that's a lot of money today. That's way more than double $265. So, we're still hanging out with the old money people, and then they decide to leave because, one, Jordan Baker is bored with them, and two, Nick wants to go meet Gatsby. So, they're going to go on this mission to go seek out Gatsby. Now, while they're doing this, they come upon a library. Now, libraries in big, fancy mansions are wall-to-ceiling bookshelves, huge, ornate, giant libraries. Think Beauty and the Beast library. Now, when they go in the library, they see this stout, middle-aged man with enormous owl-eyed spectacles who is half drunk sitting in the library, and he's kind of taken aback, and he's a little, he's been impressed with Gatsby because he says that the books are real. He even says, have pages and everything. I thought they'd be a nice, durable cardboard. Matter of fact, they're real. Here's why he is so impressed with real books. Old money people would have books and libraries handed down from generations and generations. New money people didn't have that. So a lot of times they didn't have enough books to fill their library, and they didn't want their library to look empty. So they would have cardboard cutouts of book spines, and they would put them on the shelves to make the library look full. Now, Gatsby's new money, and for him to have real books may make us think maybe he's the real deal. Maybe he doesn't have bad motives in throwing these parties, but we're still not sure. And Allies is the one that points us in this direction. Allies 1, because his glasses are these big circles. Allies 2, because owls symbolize wisdom, and he just gave us a little bit of wisdom. So we go into the library. Obviously, Gatsby's not there. And then they go back out into the party. And while they're there, someone runs into Nick and recognizes him from the war. So they have like a little conversation, and Nick's very drunk by this point. And while they're having this conversation, the man who runs into him offers to let him go out on his hydroplane tomorrow. And Nick's like, oh yeah, sure. And then he tells him, I wish I could meet Gatsby. He invited me, but I haven't been able to find him. And that's when the man who recognized him finally tells him he's Gatsby. And there'd be big fireworks and explosions if we were watching the movie. So we finally met Gatsby. Now, when he describes Gatsby, he says he has like this genuine smile, but also when you look at him, he says, I was looking at an elegant young roughneck, a year or two over 30, whose elaborate formality of speech just missed being absurd. Sometime before he introduced himself, I got a strong impression that he was picking his words with care. This description of Gatsby should raise, if not a red flag, a yellow flag. Says he looked like an elegant young roughneck, basically meaning he has the physical appearance of someone who is used to physical labor, and he's dressed elegantly. So think like kind of like a redneck dressed in a suit. However, and he's about 32 or so. He has this speech. The way he talks just missed being absurd. So he's trying to speak so formally that it's almost funny. So imagine trying to hold an Australian accent while you're talking. People are going to notice that this is not real. Also, he says, sometime before he introduced himself, I'd got the impression he was picking his words with care. It seems that Gatsby cares a great deal about what people think about him. It also tells us that he's putting on a show. So we should have some skepticism of Gatsby and who he really is. Why is he putting on a show? Why the party? We have all these questions that we need Gatsby to answer, and he has yet to answer. And before Nick can say any more, Gatsby is called away because Chicago was calling him. I don't know about you, but cities don't go around calling people just out of the blue. So this should also raise a huge red flag. Now, Jordan and Nick are left together. Jordan says that she once told her that he was an Oxford man, but she doesn't believe it. And Nick says, why? And she says, I don't know. I just don't think he went there. Here's the problem with the Oxford man. Think of a person who's lying, and their story is so elaborate and has so many fantastical, unbelievable things that you're like, this isn't real. There's no way this is real. It can't be real. That's how Gatsby tells stories. So whether it's real or not, we don't know, but we do know that people are too impressed by the stories. His stories are too impressive to believe. So, after that, the party kind of continues on. Jordan talks about how she likes the party. Then they have like a guest jazz history of the world, Vladimir Tostov performing. And while everyone's partying, Nick notices Gatsby across the room, standing alone, looking from one group to another with approving eyes. Gatsby doesn't drink at his parties. He does not party at his party. So we have to also wonder why. Why throw the party? If you are not going to partake in the party events and you're going to pay for the party events, why are you not? Why? What's the point of the party? So we have these red flags once again. While this is happening, Gatsby's butler comes up to Jordan Baker and wants to speak. Gatsby wants to speak to her privately. So she goes away, and her and Gatsby have a little conversation, which we will not find out what it is until later. Nick is then back on his own, and the party kind of continues. People don't want to leave. It's like 4 a.m. now. People are complaining about their husbands making them leave. This is like the drunk remnants of the end of the party. So we keep going, more complaining. Then, as Nick is leaving, well, before that, I'm sorry. Just as he's leaving, Jordan Baker comes out, and she says she just heard the most incredible story, but she can't tell him. She says, I've just heard the most amazing thing. And she says, it was simply amazing, but I swore I wouldn't tell it, and here I am tantalizing you. So she comes out and says, I just heard the craziest story, but she's not going to tell Nick what it is. She's messing with him. She's teasing him. So she leaves, and while Nick is walking home, because he just lives next door, he witnesses a wreck. Now, this wreck starts out as this coupe, and it is run into a wall, and the tire is gone. And at first, Allies, the guy from the library that's drunk, emerges from the vehicle, and people are asking him what happened, and he's like, I don't know anything about driving. And they say, well, if you don't know anything about driving, you shouldn't try driving. And he says, well, I wasn't trying. And so there's some confusion about this, and finally he says he wasn't driving. And then finally, the driver emerges. Says, very gradually, part by part, a pale, dangling individual stepped out of the wreck, pawing tentatively at the ground with a large, uncertain dancing shoe. The driver is so drunk that he doesn't even realize there was a wreck. He gets out of the car and says, what's the matter? Did we run out of gas? And people are like, dude, you don't have a wheel on your car. You ran into a wall. And he says, at first I didn't notice we'd stopped. For him, so this dude should obviously not be driving. Then he's asking people to tell him how to get to the gas station because he's still convinced that they just ran out of gas. And that goes on and on. And then he tells them, well, we'll just put her in reverse. That's all we have to do. Back out, just put it in reverse. And people are like, no, dude, that's not going to happen. Now, this is a funny story, and that is one of its purposes, but the other purpose is to show us that there are consequences. There are consequences to the careless behavior of Gatsby's party. F. Scott Fitzgerald, the author of this book, is also telling us that there are consequences for the world's reckless behavior. We have to remember this book was written in the Roaring '20s, before the Great Depression. So Gatsby's not saying he knows the Great Depression is going to happen, but he's saying he knows that all of this reckless behavior that's going on in America is going to have a consequence. Now, F. Scott Fitzgerald is part of the reckless behavior. Don't be fooled. He is not exempt from the reckless behavior. But he is saying there are consequences to the reckless behavior. Now, we continue on. The party's over. And then Nick kind of takes us through his day. He kind of like this boring Monday through Friday life that he's leading, aside from the parties on the weekend. Now, so he starts to like New York. He kind of makes a few work friends. so on. And then he starts hanging out with Jordan Baker more. And now, when he first met Jordan Baker, he remembered that he heard a story about her in the news, but he couldn't remember what it was. And one day, he remembers what it was. At her first big golf tournament, this is a professional golf tournament, there was a row that nearly reached the newspapers, a suggestion that she had moved her ball from a bad lie in the semifinal round. Jordan Baker cheated in a golf tournament and then lied about it. There was a scandal in the papers, and then she is from a wealthy family, and eventually the papers were paid to quit printing this story. So, now we know that Jordan Baker is a liar and a cheater. Also, it talks about how she avoided clever men. Still, Nick hangs out with her. It talks about how one time she borrowed someone's car and she accidentally left the top off in the rain and then lied about that. And then one time, her and Nick are driving. She's driving, Nick is riding, and she accidentally almost runs over somebody. So it gets so close to them that the fender of the car flicked a button on the man's coat. And Nick says, "You're a terrible driver. You should not be driving, or you should be more careful." And she says she's careful. And Nick says, "No, you're not." And she says, "Well, other people are, so they will stay out of her way. It takes two to make an accident." And then she goes on to say she hopes she never meets someone as careless as herself because she hates careless people. It's very ironic because Jordan is quite careless. And she hates careless people because obviously a careless person would not be able to take care of her careless mistakes. So at this point, we don't know if we like Jordan Baker or not. We know she's a liar. We know she's a cheater. We know she likes the drama of her best friend being cheated on by her husband. So all of this wrapped up in a nice little party of a chapter. So I hope you enjoyed chapter 3. And in chapter 4, we will see much more of Gatsby.